Hello everyone, I'm Santiago, and today I'm gonna be playing Resident Evil Requiem on the Switch 2, and I will compare it against the Steam Deck. So today we're also getting Resident Evil 7 and Village on Switch 2 as well, the same day as Requiem. I tested those, you can find them in the pinned comment, against the Steam Deck, which I found pretty impressive when it comes to visuals, but those games obviously didn't have DLSS, I could notice right away. This one, you can clearly notice that there is a different upscaler to Resident Evil 7 and Village. From what I've seen online, this is performance DLSS, so 50% resolution. So in this case, it will be 1080p, upscaled from 540p, and in portable mode, it's 360p, upscaled to 720p. But when you're playing the game on a screen or in the small device, it actually doesn't look like such a low resolution. They actually did a pretty good job with the upscaling technique on this one. But the performance target in this game is 60 FPS, so personally, when I was playing the race sections, that is more closed-off environments, it tends to be into the 60s, no problem, maybe a spike here and there when opening a door, like in Resident Evil 7 and Village. But just like in Resident Evil Village, when there is heavy combat or a bit bigger maps going on in the background, you get drops below 60 FPS. The worst drop that I saw, at least at the beginning of the game, is into the mid-30s, when you are with Leon just in the highway, shooting at a lot of zombies that are attacking people. Yeah, usually when combat happens, even indoors, it's usually into the mid-40s at worst. I think Capcom should add an optional 40 FPS cap. I think that will be ideal for people that don't want to deal with variable frame rates. Personally, I do not have a problem. I do notice when this happens, but it's less noticeable in the smaller screen because the Switch 2 has a VRR. So as long as it stays within the VRR window, we should be fine. Unfortunately, it doesn't have low frame rate compensation when it comes to VRR on Switch 2. So if it drops below 40 something, the screen doesn't actually do VRR correctly. You'll feel the judder in comparison to using VRR on a monitor as an example. Also, if you're docking your Switch 2, VRR doesn't work because the dock doesn't have support for that, apparently, or Nintendo is not allowing us to use it. So VRR only for handheld, but again, when it comes to the performance itself, we're at 540p, upscaled to 1080p. I think the game looks decent enough. The hair is a little bit pixelated, but when it comes to settings, it looks very similar to what I use on PC or on Steam Deck, a mix of medium and low settings. So yeah, when it comes to the docked experience, if you're using the Joy-Cons or the Pro Controller, you also have gyroscopic aiming, so I think that's a great thing to add. They put that on Resident Evil 7 and Village as well. So yeah, regarding docked mode, it's 60 frames indoors. When you're outdoors fighting as Leon, it tends to drop into the 40s, at worst into the mid-30s, but it doesn't seem to be anything worse than that. So far it's running way better than I expected, but after looking how it ran on Steam Deck a few days ago, I wasn't really 100% surprised on how it ran on Switch 2. So yeah, definitely an unlock FPS feeling game, especially in the heavy action sections. Is it unplayable? No, not really. Would I have liked to have a more aggressive resolution option in order to maintain 60s more consistently? Definitely. But I suspect this is a CPU bottleneck, not GPU. But again, the only difference that I would do here, if they couldn't improve performance for any reason, I would have a 40 FPS mode with a 120 FPS screen on the handheld mode. I think it would have been perfect, but maybe, who knows, in a later update we'll get something like that. Here's hoping. Just now to compare it against the Steam Deck. Alright, so Switch 2 at the left, Steam Deck at the right. On Switch 2, I'm basically on both of them, better said. I'm pointing the camera at the screen. Yeah, that's the best way I have at the moment, which I'm going to prove soon, to capture handheld footage. So at the right, the Steam Deck is an OLED model, so no LCD. So the OLED screen is way better than the LCD on the Switch 2, obviously. The other thing is the screen on the Steam Deck is 800p, while the Switch 2 is 1080p. And the game runs at 720p. It doesn't have 800p, unfortunately. That's why black bars at the top and bottom. And as a disclaimer, there's a lot of difficulties of visual comparisons when it comes to capturing screens using a camera. So yeah, there might be some differences that might look weird, like, I don't know, the pixels being visible in the OLED screen due to how focusing on the camera works, which kind of sucks, but yeah, it's not as easy to capture both side by side, so it's a one-to-one comparison. So this to have an idea and draw conclusions from how clear it looks on one versus the other, the temporal stability when the camera moves and all that. And with the FSR3 that I'm using is on quality. Quality means 480p, so from 480p to 720p. The Switch 2 is using DLSS, and that DLSS is at performance. That means 50% resolution. So the Switch 2 using DLSS is upscaling from 360p to 720p, while on Steam Deck we're at a higher resolution, 480p, going up to 720p. And despite that, I think the quality of the upscaler itself will be the most important thing here. You'll see in a moment. And yeah, obviously on Steam Deck you can change the settings, do whatever you want. You can inject other upscalers, which didn't work for me right now. I tried to inject FSR4, but the game crashed, so that's a possibility. I use the settings that the game allows me to tweak inside the Steam Deck without any third-party software. And again, the target of the Steam Deck, at least in my testing for my settings, is basically 30-something to 60, depending on what's going on, which is similar to how the Switch 2 handles it. But as a bonus, I also added the Steam Deck at native resolution, so native 800p versus FSR3 quality versus Switch 2, so you have how it looks on Steam Deck without the upscaling, which destroys hair, and well, all the quality is gone with FSR3. Three things: Switch 2 at the left, Steam Deck with quality upscaling at the middle, Steam Deck native resolution at the right with TAA. And okay, to do this triple comparison justice, I'm putting myself super tiny at the bottom right corner of the screen. So remember, Switch 2 at the left, Steam Deck with FSR quality on the middle, Steam Deck native resolution at the right. The first thing that you're going to notice is that the Switch 2 has way better raindrops on the ground. So that's the effect quality that I kept on low on Steam Deck. There's also no depth of field. I turned that off on Steam Deck because it bothers me on gameplay, and you cannot really turn it off only for the gameplay. I wish only cutscenes could stay with depth of field, and on gameplay keep it off. So that's the reason why it looks blurry here on Switch 2. So no worries, that's just personal preference. You can also use depth of field on the Steam Deck if you enable it. When it comes to the reflections, they seem to be pretty similar. Again, we're having depth of field here, so that's why you don't see stuff in the background. The Steam Deck is at 50 frames here, 43 at native. And yeah, looking at the hair back here, yeah, I think the Switch does a way better job figuring out how the hair should look like in motion. But the three of them are pretty damn good. When it comes to the ghostiness on the Switch 2, that's because of the screen. The screen has a pretty poor response time. But again, if you're not playing in slow motion, you're probably not going to notice. I see it if I'm looking at screens side by side. But at the end of the day, on the Switch 2 screen, you're going to notice more ghosting despite motion blur being turned off. First of all, what you're going to notice, the colors are different. OLED screen versus LCD screen. There's no way around it. When it comes to textures, into the distance, I feel like the Steam Deck looks sharper when it comes to these textures right here. We'll see better once we get into the smaller objects that I'm going to zoom into. But Steam Deck on native is resolving better when it comes to this things into the distance. Remember that this pixels is because it's an OLED screen. You don't see the squared pixels in real life. Just a panel being pointed with a camera issue. You can notice the difference, especially on native, obviously, because it's a higher pixel count. But DLSS is doing a very respectable job with the hair in comparison to FSR3. FSR3 is getting a lot of pixelation on the hair, even on native. And performance in this section on Switch 2 is similar to what I showed you a moment ago when it comes to dock mode. This is handheld. It's into the 40-ish FPS range when looking at this side, so very similar to Steam Deck on FSR3 on quality. I wish just FSR3 was better at resolving detail like DLSS is. It's a huge difference. I mean, yeah. Going into a section when you start getting good performance on every platform, this part is not as open, but this is the part that I notice the most artifacts with upscaling. I mean, look at FSR3, how poorly it resolves this simple fence. DLSS works fantastically well with TAA at native resolution. If you can see here, it can resolve this detail behind the fence, which DLSS cannot. So again, there's stuff behind the fence. With TAA at 720p native, you can see stuff behind there is lost with DLSS. But again, we're upscaling from 360p. But again, FSR3 is just absolute dog shit in comparison. I mean, look at this. But again, performance, you lose 10 frames by using native on Steam Deck. Let's see, now looking at this stuff into the distance, yeah, FSR3 does a terrible job. Look at all the artifacting. DLSS does a good job, and native resolution is doing okay as well. There's still some artifacting from TAA and big contrast, but yeah, DLSS handles it pretty well. Remember that the resolution here, think about it for a second, on the Switch 2 we are at 360p. In the middle with the FSR3 we are getting 480p, and here we're at 720p at the right. So the fact that it can look so good being at 360p at the left boggles my mind. Again, 360p versus 480p versus native. That's crazy. Crazy legwork from DLSS for the Switch 2. So yeah, that's a shame, honestly. It's so bad at maintaining detail there. Same with the hair. There's a lot of pixelation around hair even on DLSS, which is less obvious with native resolution, but again, way more pixels, 360p versus 720. And at 480p at FSR3, the hair doesn't look amazing either. There's more chunkiness in the middle of the hair instead of just the edges like in DLSS. Now for another temporal upsampling test, there is this thing, this fence. So when I move, DLSS has some trouble with it, especially with the shadow behind it. Native resolution is fine, and FSR3 is just a pixelated mess in comparison. It doesn't know what to do with it. This specific case, if you see FSR3, you can notice it. Native res is fine, which should be. And DLSS also does a good job. Into the distance with hair in front, you can see more of that pixelation. But then it does a way better job than FSR3 when it comes to the edges. Here again, something that is illuminated with a dark background that moves, which is the shadow in this case. So yeah, obviously 360p versus 720, no contest, but just to say FSR3 looks bad. Alright, so now some texture quality comparisons. This photo, I mean, texture quality seems to be pretty similar. On Steam Deck, it's the lowest quality textures for PC, so keep that in mind. It might be looking a little bit better, but again, it could be down to the screen quality as well. Not entirely sure. Let me know your opinions below. But this is again to compare texture quality. Also, the edges here are clearly of a lower resolution on Switch 2, but again, to be expected. Let's talk room 204. Yeah, definitely, I think the texture resolution is higher, at least when it comes to the text here. But again, I'm zooming in quite a bit. Yeah. Yeah. You can notice that the edges are from a lower resolution image. So the 360p, I mean, you can see it at the edges of some objects like this one. Because here we're at 480p and it looks a lot better. But again, it's a 3D model view here. Looking at more textures. Yeah, definitely they're filtered differently, the textures. If you look at it on the Steam Deck here, it kind of looks worse. Yeah, I would say so. So some textures are better, some other ones look the same. And let's see. Yeah, I mean, the textures might be a tiny bit better. But also the depth of field doesn't help. Oh man, FSR3 wrecks any visual clarity. And yeah, look at the hair. Although here I'm using depth of field, I should have kept it on for the Steam Deck. I'm a moron. I also noticed that the film grain cannot be turned off, even on PC. So you have to live with film grain going on. Okay, so here you can take a closer look at the hair. Yeah, here the shadows are flickering a bit. Yeah, so this is what I was trying to see. Yeah, I mean, the keyboard looks almost the same. I mean, the texture quality is pretty close. Again, we're on low settings, the lowest textures on PC. And yeah, the depth of field doesn't do us any favors. So yeah, it does look pretty damn similar. Okay, so now Grace grabs the keys. I did as much zoom as I could in this moment for this reason. I mean, yeah, the texture quality, at least here the Switch 2 resolves this texture better. Not sure if it's due to the DLSS, because here at the edges of this item, you can notice that it's a pretty low resolution. On the others, you can see the edges better because it's a higher resolution. But when it comes to the texture itself, it seems to be doing a better job at sharpening that. So yeah, I think it's pretty clear like that. 360p, 480p, 720p due to the edges. But then the texture quality here looks pretty good. So it might be a tiny bit higher in some places on Switch 2. Going into the Leon section, which is also dark. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the hair, I think it's pretty obvious which one is native. Although DLSS does a good job considering it's 360p. Let's see, stuff into the distance, come on, get it out of the way. Yeah, FSR3 doesn't do a good job. But DLSS, again, considering how low the resolution is surprising me. Native resolution looks good, but it's a bigger performance hit, and we're talking about, as I said multiple times, 360p versus 720p. The hair resolving FSR3 is just bad. DLSS does a better job, not perfect, but still there. Native resolution, significantly better job with the hair, without a doubt, but performance is a problem. So here, 49 FPS with FSR3, 38 FPS at native. And one other thing that I'm noticing just now, the rain in the ground looks way better on Switch 2 also. Let's kick him in the face in 3 devices. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the rain in the ground on Switch 2, is wow, it looks awesome. Yeah, definitely the effects quality being on low instead of high makes a difference here for the Switch 2. Just, again, look at the water splashes on the ground, on that puddle. The thing that bothers me is FSR3. FSR3 should have so much better image quality. I mean, this just shows you how much a good upscaler matters, especially in a portable device. I mean, native resolves hair way better than DLSS, obviously, but again, this is half the pixels. Half the pixels, and you're still getting a good image. That's crazy. So yeah, looking at this side by side to say it in some way, while the Steam Deck can get super close in performance using quality FSR3, DLSS, when it comes to visual fidelity, I think it destroys FSR3. I mean, it's obvious it's proprietary technology. I mean, just in comparison to what it can do versus native 720 at 360p, blows my mind. As you can see here, FSR3 just wrecks the edges. DLSS does it a little bit, but again, the amount of resolution that we have here is way lower than in the middle. And well, native just looks significantly more stable. And the issue here, if you go native resolution, is that you're not going to hit the 35 to 60 FPS thing on Steam Deck. It will be mostly 30 to 40 something in comparison. Which one should you choose? Well, if you already have a PC, I think having it on Steam Deck is not a bad idea. Your save goes to the cloud, then you can continue in your Steam Deck, and the other way around. You play on your Steam Deck, then you can get the cloud save on your PC and continue. But on Switch 2, it still looks fantastic. I'm blown away on what they managed to do with freaking 360p, upscaled to 720p. And obviously on the Switch 2, as you've seen in this video multiple times, it's not perfect 60s, nowhere close. It drops into the 30s on combat, mostly into the mid 40s is where it drops when you're having heavy combat with Leon. It also drops there on Steam Deck, but it drops into the 40-something-ish FPS range, excepting in the highway part. There, the Switch and the deck drop into the 30s as well. My only issue with the Steam Deck is that FSR 3 looks bad, looks horrible. So if I'm able to inject FSR 4 or a better upscaler, I'm going to make another video because the game is crashing for me if I try that. But considering how the DLSS resolves the image at 360p, this gives me high hope for other games coming to Steam Deck and Switch 2. So definitely the deck on native resolution, it looks extra crispy, as you can see right now, but you sacrifice performance. Instead of being into the 40s here, you're into the 30s. But to be fair, the Switch 2 is into the 40s with drops into the 30s here as well, as I showed you at the beginning of the video. This drops a bit below, but it's 720p versus 360p. So yeah, I don't think it's a bad way to experience the game on any of the machines. The Switch 2 has the edge on portable mode, at least in my opinion, when it comes to image quality at a higher frame rate. Because again, yeah, the Switch 2 is 360p, but at the same time it resolves the image way better than if I do upscaling with the native settings on Steam Deck. So I don't think any of the versions is bad. Just make sure if you play on Steam Deck to use a custom upscaler that I'm going to try and make work somehow. Right now it's not working. But if you like playing docked as well, the Switch 2 is way better in that regard because you can dock it, it's a higher resolution, and it's just plug and play on your TV. You can do the same thing on Steam Deck, but when you put the Steam Deck on a dock, it doesn't increase its performance like the Switch 2 does. So yeah, you have to be more aggressive with the upscaler if you're doing, for example, 1080p. So yeah, I think it's a great way to play the game in either of the two machines. I will play it on the Steam Deck just because of the fact that I can actually grab that save and play it on PC seamlessly, so that's perfect. But if you only have a Switch 2, it's not a bad way to play the game at all. It looks fantastic on both of them. So thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll see ya next time. Bye guys, thanks for watching.